Hollywood loves to sell the illusion of perfection, the shimmering lights, the untouchable icons, the promise that fame can protect anyone from tragedy. But during the darkest years of the AIDS crisis, that illusion collapsed. Behind the cameras, 9 legendary actors lived and died in silence, trapped between a deadly virus and an industry terrified of the truth. Their stories expose a Hollywood where fear mattered more than compassion, where secrecy was currency, and where a diagnosis could end not only a career, but a life. Why were these actors forced to hide their illness, even as their bodies failed them? Why did Hollywood choose silence over support, reputation over humanity? And what made a generation of stars believe that the truth about who they loved or how they lived was more dangerous than the disease itself? These 9 stories are not just about death. They are about the cost of hiding, the weight of shame, the brutality of stigma, and the heartbreaking reality of a world that punished vulnerability. What follows is a journey into the shadows, a place where legends fought battles they were never allowed to speak of, and where their light was dimmed long before it should have been. For Rock Hudson, the terror wasn't death. It was the moment the world might discover who he truly was. That quiet truth shaped every chapter of his life, from the moment Hollywood crowned him its leading man to the day he drew his final breath. To millions, Hudson was the embodiment of masculine perfection, tall, handsome, gentle, impossibly charming. But perfection was a performance, and behind it lived a man suffocating under the weight of secrets that the industry demanded he protect at all costs. From his earliest days at Universal, Rock Hudson's life was not his own. Publicists dictated his friendships, his dates, even his smiles. Studio executives forced him into a highly publicized marriage designed not for love, but for damage control, a cage disguised as respectability. Meanwhile, the relationships that truly mattered to him endured in the shadows, negotiated through whispers and coded signals, always one photographer away from disaster. When he contracted HIV in the early 1980s, fear became his constant companion. He continued working, traveling, attending events, all while hiding a virus the world refused to understand. Hollywood, terrified of scandal, urged him to remain silent. Doctors treated him in private wings. Friends signed confidentiality agreements. Every system around him reinforced the same cruel message: your truth is more dangerous than your illness. By 1985, his body could no longer support the lie. Weak, exhausted, and out of options, Hudson made the decision no studio could stop. He revealed his diagnosis to the world. The announcement sent shockwaves across global media. It marked the first time a towering Hollywood icon openly confronted AIDS, shattering the illusion that it was a disease that affected others. Yet even in death, controversy followed him. His longtime partner, Mark Christian, claimed Hudson knowingly exposed him to HIV, resulting in one of the most infamous lawsuits in entertainment history. The legal battle forced Hollywood to confront its own hypocrisy. The industry that silenced Hudson's identity suddenly found itself debating the ethics of truth, privacy, and responsibility. Rock Hudson's death did more than end a life. It ended an era of enforced silence. His courage forced the world to look at AIDS not as a rumor or a curse, but as a human tragedy written behind closed studio gates. And in doing so, he became something he never intended to be, a symbol of truth finally breaking free from the machinery that spent decades burying it. Anthony Perkins' life is defined by a cruel irony. He terrified the world as Norman Bates, yet the fear that governed his own existence was far more intimate and far more dangerous. Hollywood loved him for an image he could never fully inhabit, and from the moment fame wrapped around him, he understood that the truth about who he loved could destroy everything he had worked for. Behind the gentle smile and soft-spoken charm was a man navigating a labyrinth of secrecy. In the 1950s and 60s, when even a rumor of homosexuality could end a career overnight, Perkins lived with constant vigilance. His relationships with men had to be coded, fleeting, arranged through trusted intermediaries. Even moments of tenderness were filtered through tension, a door left slightly ajar, a glance over the shoulder, a fear that someone might see what they were never meant to see. When he married Barry Berenson, Hollywood saw it as confirmation that Perkins had finally become the leading man they wanted him to be. But behind the scenes, the marriage functioned as another shield, a way to redirect questions, avoid suspicion, and buy time in an industry built on illusions. The tragedy is not that he loved her any less, but that he never felt he had the right to fully reveal himself, even to the person closest to him. As AIDS silently spread through the LGBTQ+ community in the early 1980s, Perkins' already fragile peace collapsed under a new layer of dread. When he contracted HIV, he responded the only way he had been trained to respond since the beginning. He hid. He continued to work, continued to smile, continued to give interviews where he spoke philosophically about the epidemic, while never acknowledging that the virus was already consuming him from within. In private, he recorded messages for his sons that would be played only after his death, his attempt to leave them truths he could not say aloud. And when he finally died in 1992, the revelation of his illness stunned the world. Fans mourned the loss of a great actor, but few understood the deeper tragedy. A man who spent his entire life performing, even in the moments when the cameras were no longer rolling. Brad Davis's downfall proves a devastating truth about Hollywood. The moment an actor becomes vulnerable, the same industry that once praised him will turn away without hesitation. For years, Davis was hailed as the next great American leading man, the rebel spirit meant to carry the legacy of Marlon Brando into a new generation. But fame, for him, would become a fleeting privilege, one that dissolved the instant he became sick. At the height of his career, Davis embodied intensity. His performance in Midnight Express earned global acclaim, opening doors to roles that demanded raw emotion and physical bravery. Yet behind the fiery exterior was a man quietly battling addiction, insecurity, and an industry that valued him only as long as he fit its mold. When he learned he had contracted HIV, Davis understood that the truth could end his career overnight. And so he made a choice that would define his final years. He hid. He continued acting even as his body weakened, pushing himself through grueling shoots, makeup sessions, and scenes that demanded physical strength he no longer had. Directors noticed he seemed tired. Co-stars whispered that something was off. But no one knew the truth. Not yet. Hollywood had no compassion for sick men, only replacements. Then came the leak. Rumors circulated through casting offices. Producers pulled back. Projects vanished. Davis found himself no longer considered a rising star, but a liability. Offers dried up, and the silence from the industry he once carried on his shoulders became louder than any rejection letter. The media storm that followed was relentless. Instead of empathy, Davis faced invasion. Reporters demanded details. Gossip tabloids printed lies about his personal life. His private tragedy became a public spectacle, and the world watched him crumble under a weight he had spent years trying to hide. In the end, the disease was not the only thing killing him. It was the humiliation, the loss of identity, and the constant reminder that Hollywood valued him only when he was profitable. Unable to bear the pain, physical and emotional, Davis made the heartbreaking decision to end his life through assisted suicide. In his final letter, he wrote words that still echo through the industry. "I feared Hollywood more than death." Brad Davis did not simply die of AIDS. He died of a system that discards its icons the moment they stop shining. Robert Reed's life reveals a painful paradox. He spent years playing America's ideal father on television, yet in reality, he never felt safe enough to live as his true self. The man who brought warmth, stability, and gentle wisdom to millions of homes through the Brady Bunch carried a secret so heavy that it shaped every decision he made, both on and off the screen. From the beginning, Reed understood that Hollywood had strict expectations for its leading men. He was to be masculine, reliable, respectable, the embodiment of a wholesome fantasy. But behind the scenes, he lived with the constant fear that someone might uncover the truth he had been forced to conceal since youth. To avoid suspicion, Reed constructed an entire life around hiding. He maintained a carefully curated public image, even creating a family facade that allowed him to move through the industry without raising questions. Colleagues adored him for his professionalism and charm, yet not one of them knew the internal war he fought daily. Reed's journals later revealed the emotional toll. He wrote about the exhaustion of living behind a mask, the loneliness of performing masculinity, and the fear that exposure would destroy everything he had built. He longed for honesty, but the world he lived in gave him no safe path to it. When he contracted HIV, Reed responded with the same instinct that had guided him his entire adult life: silence. Not even close friends or longtime castmates suspected the truth. He continued working, smiling, and delivering comforting fatherly lines on screen, all while his body weakened away from public view. In 1992, when Reed's death certificate listed AIDS-related complications, the revelation stunned Hollywood. Those who had known him for decades were confronted with the reality that they never truly knew him at all. Fans mourned the man who had represented family, trust, and love, unaware that he spent his real life deprived of those very things. Robert Reed's tragedy is not merely that he died of AIDS. It is that he lived in a world where honesty was a luxury he was never allowed to afford, and where the role he perfected on television became the mask he could never remove. Denholm Elliott's final years expose a haunting contrast. On screen, he was the epitome of refinement and wit, yet in real life he died in near silence, as if the world was never meant to witness his suffering. For decades, Elliott charmed audiences with unforgettable roles. The cultured companion in A Room with a View, the endearingly anxious Marcus Brody in Indiana Jones. But behind the polished exterior lived a man whose personal battles were far more complex than any character he ever played. Elliott's private life had always carried an air of mystery. Friends knew him as warm, brilliant, and unapologetically unconventional. Yet his nightlife, especially during the liberating but dangerous era of the 1970s London club scene, placed him at the center of rumors the press eagerly exploited. When he later contracted HIV, the industry whispered theories long before any facts were known. His family maintained that he was infected through a blood transfusion, but tabloids insisted otherwise, painting him as reckless, a narrative easier for them to sensationalize than to understand. As his health declined, Elliott drifted farther from Hollywood's glare. He relocated to Ibiza, choosing isolation over scrutiny, peace over questions. There, surrounded by sunlight and sea, he lived out his remaining months with the quiet dignity that had always defined him. Yet even in this final refuge, he remained shadowed by the fear of exposure. The man who could make millions laugh with a single raised eyebrow now faced an illness he was expected to hide, because acknowledging it meant inviting stigma onto himself and onto the franchises he had helped elevate. When he died in 1992, the truth, AIDS-related complications, emerged reluctantly, met with discomfort rather than compassion. Hollywood, still terrified of association with the epidemic, downplayed the news. Fans mourned, but few understood the magnitude of what he endured. A life marked by talent and charm, overshadowed in its final chapter by secrecy he never deserved. Denholm Elliott's legacy shines brightly on screen, but the silence surrounding his death remains a stark reminder of the era he lived in, a time when even the most beloved figures were forced to suffer quietly, far from the applause that once carried them. Amanda Blake's final chapter reveals one of Hollywood's most painful hypocrisies. Even in death, she was denied the right to speak her truth. As the beloved Miss Kitty from Gunsmoke, she spent nearly 20 years captivating audiences with wit, strength, and unmistakable charm. But when her life took a tragic turn, the industry that had benefited from her presence insisted on silence, especially because she was a woman. Blake had always been a private person, but privacy became a prison the moment she became ill. When she contracted HIV, the stigma surrounding the disease was still at its peak, and the idea of a female star being associated with it was considered unthinkable. Fame had given her visibility, but visibility now threatened her reputation. Hollywood feared that admitting the truth would tarnish one of television's most enduring icons, so a narrative was constructed to protect the brand rather than the woman. At the time of her death in 1989, the official explanation given to the public was complications from cancer. It was only when medical reports leaked that the truth, AIDS-related complications, came to light. The revelation shocked fans, but infuriated the industry, which had hoped to bury the story entirely. For some, the leak felt like a betrayal. For others, it was the only moment Amanda was finally allowed to be seen as a human being, rather than a symbol of pristine nostalgia. The controversy deepened when rumors surfaced suggesting she had been infected by her last husband, who also died of AIDS shortly afterward. Instead of compassion, Blake faced speculation, judgment, and a swirl of unfounded theories that overshadowed her enormous contributions to television history. Amanda Blake's tragedy is not only that she died from a deadly virus, it is that she lived in a world where the truth of her illness was considered more scandalous than the suffering she endured. Her story stands as a stark reminder of how differently Hollywood treated women, denied honesty, denied dignity, and forced into silence even in their final breath. Jill Ireland's story exposes a different kind of cruelty from the AIDS era. She did not die from the virus, yet the world insisted on writing her into its narrative. As an actress and the longtime partner of Charles Bronson, Ireland spent her career balancing elegance with resilience. But in the final years of her life, as she fought a brutal battle against breast cancer, the tabloid press twisted her suffering into a spectacle, using her name to fuel one of the most heartless rumors of the decade. Ireland's illness had already placed her under intense emotional and physical strain, yet she faced her diagnosis with extraordinary bravery. She became an advocate for cancer patients, speaking openly about her treatments and the realities of chronic pain, a level of honesty few public figures dared to show at the time. But her openness made her vulnerable, and during the height of AIDS hysteria, vulnerability was easily weaponized. When her health began to decline rapidly, certain tabloids saw an opportunity. They published stories claiming that Ireland was secretly dying of AIDS, exploiting fear and misinformation for attention. The rumors spread with alarming speed, overshadowing the real struggle she was enduring. Her family, already devastated by her worsening condition, was forced to confront headlines that turned her final months into a cruel guessing game. Hollywood attempted to intervene, but the damage was done. The public became divided. Some believed the fabrications, others questioned why the truth mattered at all. Ireland's dignity, her advocacy work, and her humanity were reduced to a morbid curiosity. In a world desperate to assign blame for a disease it did not understand, even the innocent could be dragged into the fire. When Jill Ireland died in 1990, the official cause, complications from cancer, should have brought closure. Instead, the false narrative persisted, a reminder of how easily a woman's suffering could be rewritten by those hungry for sensationalism. Her legacy is not defined by the rumor, but by the strength it tried to erase. The courage of a woman who faced death openly, only to be met with lies she never deserved. Mark Christian's story shows how a single revelation can make Hollywood tremble, even when it comes from someone the industry never expected to fear. He was not a superstar, not a household name, not even a major actor. Yet, when he stepped forward after Rock Hudson's death, the narrative surrounding AIDS and the complicity of Hollywood shifted overnight. Christian became the center of a storm that exposed the industry's deepest anxieties about secrecy, responsibility, and the price of silence. For 7 years, Mark Christian was Rock Hudson's partner, sharing a life built on discretion and unspoken boundaries. Their relationship existed in a world where the wrong photograph or careless whisper could destroy everything Hudson had spent decades constructing. Christian accepted the rules of invisibility, until the day the truth became impossible to ignore. After Hudson publicly announced he was dying of AIDS, Christian learned the devastating news. Despite their long relationship, Hudson had never disclosed his condition to him. The betrayal cut deeper than the illness itself. It was not just the fear of infection, it was the realization that love, in Hollywood's shadow, had always been conditional and controlled. When Christian sued Hudson's estate for knowingly exposing him to HIV, the case exploded into one of the most controversial legal battles in entertainment history. The testimony painted a vivid and uncomfortable picture of life behind closed doors: secret trips, strict confidentiality, carefully orchestrated privacy. Hollywood watched with dread, afraid that the trial would pull back the curtain on how many stars were living similar lives. The jury ultimately sided with Christian, awarding him millions in damages. But victory did not bring peace. The public was sharply divided. Some saw him as a victim finally given justice, while others accused him of exploiting a dead man's tragedy. Headlines turned him into both martyr and villain, often within the same article. Mark Christian's legacy is complicated, but one truth remains undeniable. His voice forced a reckoning. By speaking out, he challenged not just the silence surrounding AIDS, but the entire system that demanded love be hidden, illness be denied, and truth be buried for the sake of image. Raymond Burr's life unfolds like a mystery he wrote for himself, a carefully constructed narrative designed to protect a truth he feared the world would never accept. On screen, he was the brilliant mind behind Perry Mason, the man who could unravel any lie and expose any hidden motive. But off-screen, Burr spent decades building walls so thick that even those closest to him could not see the reality he worked tirelessly to conceal. From early in his career, Burr understood that Hollywood demanded conformity, especially from its leading men. The studio system required a clean mythology, a devoted husband, a respectable past, a simple life. Burr had none of these, so he invented them. He fabricated love stories, created engagements, and spoke publicly about a wife and children who never existed, a tragic family he claimed had died young. It was a fiction crafted with the precision of a courtroom argument, and for years it worked. Behind the facade, Burr was quietly navigating relationships with men he could never openly acknowledge. As the AIDS crisis emerged in the 1980s, fear intensified the secrecy already shaping his life. When he became seriously ill, tabloids quickly speculated that AIDS was the cause, capitalizing on the climate of hysteria and stigma. The rumors spread quickly, threatening not just Burr's reputation, but the multi-million-dollar brand built around Perry Mason. The studio intervened immediately, determined to suppress any suggestion that their star might be gay or connected to the epidemic sweeping the nation. Even as Burr's health deteriorated, the official narrative focused on cancer, avoiding any detail that could ignite controversy. In his final years, he remained stoic, maintaining the illusion he had lived behind for decades, even as the truth pressed harder against the walls he built. When Burr died in 1993, the secrets he carried did not vanish. They surfaced slowly, piece by piece, in memoirs, interviews, and private accounts. What emerged was a portrait not of a deceiver, but of a man forced to choose survival over authenticity. His story stands as a final contradiction. The actor famous for revealing truth spent his life hiding his own. The 9 stories you've just witnessed reveal far more than the tragedies of individual actors. They expose the architecture of an industry built on silence, image, and fear. These were men and women who shaped entire eras of entertainment, yet when illness touched their lives, the fame they had earned became a burden rather than a shield. Hollywood prized their performances but rejected their vulnerabilities, demanding that they hide the very truths that made them human. AIDS did not just claim lives. It deepened the shadows around those who suffered, forcing them to navigate their final years behind closed doors, concealed beneath carefully crafted narratives designed to protect reputations rather than people. Their deaths were not simply a consequence of disease, but of a culture that treated honesty as a liability and compassion as optional. Today, we look back with greater understanding, but the question remains: if these actors had lived in a world less governed by fear, would their endings have been different? Would they have found safety in transparency, dignity in illness, or freedom in simply being themselves? Their stories linger as a reminder that even legends can be broken by silence, and that truth, no matter how long it's buried, refuses to stay hidden forever.